Hi everyone, welcome to Talking Mental Health. This is episode number 17 with me, Joe, and today I'm joined by John. How are you, John?
Yeah, I'm good. Feeling refreshed and positive. I don't know if people have a frame of reference for what day we're recording this on, but there's been some good news this week, which is unusual in 2020. So I'm feeling good.
Yeah, for clarity, it's Sunday. I was going to say Saturday. It's not. It's Sunday.
Yeah.
God, every day's rolled into one in this year. It's been very strange. How's this year been for you, mate?
It's been one of the most tumultuous and interesting years on record in my life. Like it's hard to explain it in sort of one sentence, I guess, which would benefit the content of a podcast, I assume. So yeah, I've learned a lot this year, and a lot of things have happened. I've had to confront a lot of personal and professional demons, and I'm here now in a point where I feel like I've learned a lot, as I say, and I can articulate what I've learned now, and I know how to work with what I've learned and do things not necessarily differently in that way, but there's definitely a clarity to it that I didn't have before.
And has a lot of that been brought on by the lockdown, or was that kind of a process that you were going through anyway, and then lockdown just kind of made you think a little bit deeper?
Well, the irony is I feel like the word issues sort of trivializes or sort of doesn't really speak to what we talk about when we say that, but my issues or the problems in my life or the obstacles to my sort of feeling content and strong, I guess, existed before lockdown, before COVID. And there's been if I were to sum up the switch, it's been enabled really by the situation that's come about by lockdown, because my situation has been that I've been given a lot more free time, so been able to do a lot of the work that you have to do on yourself, and that's flipped a switch from perhaps being in a bit of a victim mode, a victim complex, where I just felt like I was suffering a lot and didn't know how to get out of the hole that I was in, to really taking charge of my own well-being. And now the rhetoric that defines my life is mine and not other people's. So it's issues I brought in or issues that were there, but I've been able to deal with them because of the lockdown.
Yeah. And do you mind if I ask what sort of issues were there that you had to kind of bring in to the lockdown?
Yeah, a loss of identity really is the sort of overriding feature with a whole heap of low self-esteem in there. So the person that I was when I was, say, 26, 27 was like the end of a few chapters, but that particular chapter in my life, which was almost like an act one of my entire life. And the person that when I moved back from London up to the Northwest, it was on an incredible high. I was in the best place in my life, probably both fitness-wise, physically, prospectively. There were lots of things. I had confidence, but I didn't even know it was there. Do you know what I mean? It was just everything was in a place where meaning, purpose, happiness were all aligned, and everything was great. I'm not saying my life was perfect. It wasn't, but there was no negativity specifically. Obviously, everyone has up and down days. Now, fast forward nigh on 10 years, and that person had completely gone by sort of the end of 2019. I think I'd had a couple of really low moments. One, but sort of towards the end of summer 2018, decided to do some work and get my life back on track. But then the work that I'd done was negated by a lot of the sort of negative patterns of behavior that I demonstrated throughout 2019. A lot of that was exploring and discovering myself. And by the time I got to the end of 2019, I'd reached this real low in terms of those things: confidence, happiness, meaning, purpose, self-esteem. I just felt like there was no real obvious way out. And we've not touched on sort of how we've come to sort of meet, but there are a few things that happened at the same sort of juncture, really. There was a relationship that had ended a year and a half before that point, but me and my ex had tried to remain friends, but it wasn't really helpful to either of us. And she was the one, thankfully, to say, this isn't helping me and I need to step away from it. So that sort of, although it hurt at the time, I know that it was the right move for her and for me. I was in a job that was unfortunately difficult in many respects. It was ill-defined, and that's not me putting out the blame anywhere else. I could have taken responsibility for a lot more than I did. But also it happened to be a job where I was working with close friends, and that made it doubly difficult, or maybe more than doubly. But combined with all the issues that I was dealing with personally, all of these things were amplified to sort of, levels of depression and anxiety that I couldn't handle really. So I was having trouble at work. I was having trouble dealing with getting over this relationship, and I felt very lonely. And Christmas was it was 2 weeks of anxiety for me, that particular Christmas. And I came back into 2020 and I had resolved to sort of try and take steps, even if they didn't necessarily feel easy or natural. And one of those steps was, so that was a long-winded way of saying, we met through Mike, and I turned up to Talk About It Mate facilitator volunteering training. Not the irony, but the coincidence of that, we're talking about it today, is we've got the second iteration of that now. At that first one, there were about 6 of us, and that was the first ever one. And today we've got 20 people coming maybe to the Talk About It Mate facilitator training, which is just amazing, because that kind of bookends the growth for me personally. I can see that in the things that I'm involved in. So I turned up to that, even though I remember the day was a really rainy day. I'd been out the night before, which was standard at this point. Like every weekend I was just self-medicating. I was going out. And I almost didn't go. And I dragged myself. It was literally like there was another person in the room who was going, you need to get your ass to this training because you want to volunteer. You know that this is so important to you. It will help you. You'll help other people. You're good at this. You're good at facilitation. You're good at coaching. And I got myself there. And it's things like that. If I know that you do a lot of coaching yourself, but like things like that, I would say to people, if you can't see the step-by-step, we've talked in groups before about, just one little step, one little thing can snowball, can spiral, and can become something really transformational. And if I hadn't gone to that meeting, I don't know where I would be this year. I really couldn't tell you. I'm not saying that I wouldn't have necessarily done the work that I've done, but it made a massive difference to become involved in that community and to get to know those people. That those people have become probably my closest confidants this year, because I've spent so much time in the Talk About It Mate community, aligned with the fact that I ended up leaving that job that I was in, that was just, again, like the relationship. We use this word toxic quite a lot, but the relationship that was definitively ended and the job that I was in were both toxic to all parties, really. It wasn't helping anyone. And that came to an end, not in a very helpful way. I'll be honest, I think it could have been dealt with better. But in the end, the resolution really helped me because it gave me some time to really focus on the things that I thought were important. And that didn't come easy. I think sometimes people say, it gave me time so I could do the work. Sometimes doing the work, even when I had weeks on end of free time, just felt insurmountable because of the particular mental health considerations that I had, the anxieties that I had, the moments of depression that I had. I knew that there were small steps I could take, but they just felt like impossibilities. So, again, I could say a lot more about the specifics, but the relationships have been left behind. I've started new relationships and a new existence within Talk About It Mate, and that has really helped me.
That's good. So you've come out the other end of it essentially to be not the same person or a stronger person, but just almost like a new you.
Yeah, the way that Mike described it was chapter 2 of John Wright or whatever. But I remember there was one day when I was down at Media City in the summer, and I was reading a book for our book club, and I just texted him and saying, you know what, this is the first time I'm excited about the next chapter of my life, because it really does feel like the person that I was even 6 months ago. That's not who I am now. And that's been demonstrated by some of the things and the decisions and the actions that I've taken over the last couple of months. Some areas where my boundaries have been really strong in places where previously they were really weak, and I would allow people to behave in certain ways or say certain things or treat me in certain ways. And they wouldn't even necessarily perceive it as negative, but it was hurting me. And I can see now, and I believe now, that I can step up and put those boundaries in place. It's a big, big thing for me. So like you say, I'm not a new person, and I'm not the same person that I was when I was 26, but I'm a more resilient version of myself now. Yeah. And I'm better equipped to deal with what comes next. And we know that for most people, this is going to be a really, really tricky period. The whole year's been tricky, but this next period is going to be really tricky. And I just feel like I don't know how I would have dealt with it. You know, as a very social person as well, who really needs people in their life, how I would have dealt with it if I hadn't done this work. I really don't know.
Just wanted to go back a little bit because you mentioned before about you went down to London when you were younger. What was the decision making process behind that one?
The thing is, like when I was younger, there wasn't really a decision making process. Life was just very easy, and this is part of my. I think it's quite a typical millennial with supportive parents and some latent degree of ability. You know, everything up until I was 22, 23 just sort of happened. The first decision I ever had to make was leaving my first job, which is why I moved to London. So I was at uni and I had a girlfriend, serious relationship, and that we met at uni, and all our friends were the same friends. And the typical thing to do at that point in our group was you get a job after you left uni, and most of those jobs were in London. And it never ever occurred to me that that's not what I was going to do, or that even I had a say in it. It just felt natural. But equally, it didn't feel like it was forced upon me. I just was going with the flow. But even before that, you know, school, I knew I was going to go to college. I knew I was going to go to uni. I knew I just knew it. It was just instinctive. And so, yeah, I moved to London, had a really interesting living situation for the first 6 months because I lived with my ex and her dad, and we stayed in her and her sister's old room, and it was like so hard to describe. They weren't bunk beds, you know, like those beds that are raised off the ground, so there's like a desk underneath.
Mm-hmm.
There was 2 of those single in the room. So if we wanted to share a bed, we had to sleep in the same single pseudo bunk bed. But a lot of nights we'd sleep in these separate sibling raised single beds. It's so surreal. And then she went traveling for 6 months, and then I ended up living with her dad on my own in these single bunk bed things for like a month and a half. And at the time, this is the point. Like nothing fazed me at this point. Everything was just, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. There was no level of like anxiety. And even when she went away for 6 months, and now the thought of that, I'd really struggled with that in terms of my neurosis. I was completely like, I mean, it was difficult. Obviously, it was difficult, but I never felt depressed. I never felt scared or really sad. I just missed her, and obviously I got elements of worry and overthinking, whatever. But the difference between that person who moved to London with not even a second thought, and then I stayed in London for a few years. There were a few friends there, so I moved in with a friend the year after. I retrained. So my first big decision was I had this amazing opportunity. I was at a company called PwC doing a grad scheme, which thousands of people would have killed to do. And I think back to this 21-year-old kid, this 22-year-old kid maybe, and he had the balls after 6 months to say, I don't want to do this. I'm just going to leave. I don't even necessarily know what I'm going to do yet, but I'm just going to leave. I don't want to do it. They were like, stay, you know, we want to train you, we want to build you up. And I was just like, nope, don't want it. I'm going to leave, going to do something else. Took some time, decided to retrain to be a teacher, to sort of amalgamate some skills that I had. But equally, I was just like, you know what? I've always wanted to be an actor. I'm just going to do that. And at the time, I remember like I was getting serious pushback from a lot of people around me. Especially at the time, my girlfriend's sister was just like, she worked at PwC, and she was just like almost sneering at the decision. Like, why would you leave to go and do acting? Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. And to some extent, she was probably a bit correct, but I didn't care. And I think that's something that I wish I had a little bit more of now. And I'm trying to build up is like, I knew that was congruous for me. I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do that. I wasn't going to deny it because of what other people thought. And if it went wrong, it went wrong. It didn't matter. I'd deal with it. A lot of these things that I now read in all these well-being and self-help books, like Feel the Fear, Do It Anyway, is all about you will handle it. You know, and all we ever speak about in terms of in peer support and stuff is congruence. A lot of these things that I'm talking about now with references and frames of references and definitions and terms, I was just applying naturally when I was younger. I was just like, you know, I will handle it. Whatever happens, I'll take on more debt. It's fine. I will handle it. I will brave the ridicule if it goes wrong. I will handle it. And anyway, I ended up being a teacher for a couple of years in London, and then I didn't really do the acting thing because I realized very quickly that you probably needed some networks or some training to be. It is a craft, and I think I disrespected that a little bit, to be honest. I thought I could just do it because I'd been in circles where I'd been alongside very talented, successful professional actors, and I thought I could just do it. which was a disrespect, but it's fine. I learned from that. And I didn't feel upset by that. But then I was working in Brixton, living with my ex, and I got this lead role in an amateur dramatics production down in London. But the difference between Amdram in London and up here is that in London it's all ex-pros, so you're surrounded by all these people that have been to drama school, and I got the lead, and I was like, shit, well, I've got the lead in this amazing production, and all these incredible people are around me, and all these people auditioned, then maybe I should just try and go to drama school. So I couldn't really afford to go anywhere else other than somewhere where I could live at home, and I wanted to go to a good one. So there was literally one drama school and one course I could do. I thought, right, if I get in there, I'll go. So I applied, I went, and I knew that if I got in, that would mean leaving an entire life behind. And my life at that point was really good, but I still did it because, again, it was I wasn't doing it for other people. I was doing it for me, and I knew what I needed to do. I got in. I left a fantastic, amazing person behind in my ex at the time, a life that I was comfortable and happy in, but I just knew that I needed to do this. I knew that I needed this challenge. And that's really where it all sort of took a downturn when I moved back up. Not immediately, but gradually from the moment I moved back up north, that those strengths that I had, those sort of things that I would try and instill in other people now, and the things that I would like back and that I'm trying to work towards over the years, and I didn't even notice at first, just disappeared. And I became this, my locus of evaluation, as my counsellor likes to tell me, had flipped from being completely internal. Like, all my decisions were considerate of other people, of course. I wasn't ever going to just do things selfishly. I was very considerate, but at the end of the day, it was my opinion that mattered more than anyone else's. And then it completely flipped. So like this time 2 years ago, I had no opinions that would matter, and everything was based on what the people said. Everything was based on how the people would react. And the times when I tried to fight against that and tried to have an internal locus of evaluation, it seemingly went wrong. Like, people get upset with me, people wouldn't like it. And that's because I was surrounding myself with the wrong people. You know, I was in the wrong relationships. I was with the wrong friends. Because I'm not going to say should, but it seemed unhealthy to me to be around people who never trusted what I wanted and always wanted what they wanted. So yeah, that's the sort of story of London. Was I moved down there for work and then moved back up, and that was sort of the end of the sort of self-driven John, I guess.
Yeah, because I think you said, I don't know, 10 minutes ago maybe, that when you moved back up, you were full of confidence. You had that sort of self-belief, and then you just mentioned that kind of slowly eroded over time. Did it take you a while to realize that it was going away?
Yeah, I think that's the scary thing when you're I was in a situation, and again, there's no blame on anyone else. This just life, isn't it? People don't realize that they're doing this, and you don't realize what you're doing until after the fact. But I had that strength really continued for sort of 6 to 9 months. Then a few things happened that, you know, I'm not going to sort of betray other people's situations and confidence in this conversation. That wouldn't be fair. But there were some things that really were traumatic, and some things that really go beyond you and are more important and bigger than you. And you can't help but react to those. If you don't react to those things, then that almost for me is a sign of like sociopathy or something like that, because I couldn't, as much as I was strong on my boundaries, really strong on my boundaries. Like when I was dating people at the time, before I went to drama, so I moved home, and there was like 3 or 4 months before I went to drama school, where I was just at home. And then I went to drama school, and whenever I was dating people or seeing people or whatever, for example, this is of strong boundaries, I would immediately tell them, look, I'm still in love with my ex, and my plan was always to go back to London and be with this person. That was the idea. Do this for 15, 16 months, go back to London, start an acting career. That was the conversation that I had with my ex, and I really meant it. But there were things that happened in that sort of 6 to 9 months after I moved up that just meant that saying that became a really heartless thing to say. And I realized that, and I still tried to be that person, but I could see that it was hurting other people. And eventually I sort of gave that boundary a shift, and then another shift, and then another shift. And when I think in that situation, there was a perception of me shifting my boundaries, that was capitalized on unconsciously. I don't think it was a deliberate manipulation or an abuse. It was just, I can see now that if I behave in this way, that is going to happen. And that sort of continued and exacerbated and got worse. And my boundaries kept shifting back and back and back. And I was in a relationship really for 5 years where that was the dynamic between us, and neither of us was happy with it. Neither of us wanted that. And it was a very serious relationship. We ended up engaged, which I think was for the wrong reasons. And so in the end, there was a period of time when we were apart, and I was in a play actually. And I had this feeling that I hadn't had for a while, and I stepped away from it, and I reflected on that feeling, and I was like, what is this feeling? Because it just feels so different. It feels really positive. And I just had this moment where I went, this is happiness. This is what being happy feels like. And it's been so long since I felt that I knew I had to end that relationship, despite how much I knew that was going to hurt a lot of people, was going to be a massive, like, we planned stuff. There was a wedding date, there was venues, there was, and ending all that was like, it took that sort of final bit of me that was still strong enough to have boundaries and to make decisions, and it took that last ebb of that. And I really felt like I could see that I was getting depressed. I could see that I was getting, I wouldn't have called it depressed and I wouldn't have called it anxious, but I could sense in myself that I wasn't the person that I was 5 years before, 6 years before. I wouldn't have necessarily labelled it. And there were other traumas going on in my life that weren't necessarily mine individually, but I was a part of. And I thought that ending the relationship would fix all that, because I thought it was all situational. I didn't realise that there'd been damage done to my way of thinking and my reality. And so when the relationship ended, I had this like period of time where I was on a high, really, because the stress of the relationship had disappeared, and I was left as this liberated person who felt like he'd fixed all the problems. What I didn't realize is that that's when really the work should have been done on myself. And I went out there and I thought I was ready to meet someone, and I met someone very, very quickly within like 6 months, and it got very serious very quickly. But it was completely, again, it was just the foundation of that relationship was really poor, because it was based completely on my lack of boundaries. And that's when I started, you asked me sort of, did I, was it a slow process, and almost did I realize what was going on? That's when I really realized that I was a different person, because I started behaving in ways that I didn't recognize. I didn't see that in myself. The weakness in me, and I mean that in terms of for myself and for her, it was just palpable. And it was a cycle. There was no way out of it, seemingly. And this time around, I didn't have the strength that I did when I broke up with my ex-fiance to actually end the relationship. I tried to walk away at one point, and I just couldn't. And that kept happening. Like I say, up until winter 2019, because she had to walk away from the entire situation, and we weren't even together at that point. I was just so codependent then. My boundaries were non-existent. I had no self-esteem. Everything was driven by how I was perceived in that situation. And it was like this stark, like, whoa, like I stepped away after the relationship ended for the first time. And the difference was this time, so we broke up on and off, but the big breakup that happened sort of 2018, I walked away and I went, doesn't feel the same as when I broke up with my previous ex. What the hell has changed? Something is wrong. And I was depressed, and I had a bit of I was working away in London a lot, and I've had suicidal ideation, and I was really, really, really low. I just got immediately into self-medicating and going out all the time, seeking validation through, whatever means I could. And I was trapped in a cycle of hating how I was behaving and hating how I was feeling, but not being able to deal with it. So I can't put my finger on when it changed. It was gradual, but it was also a massive shift.
And you said, back when you noticed a change was happening, but you didn't sort of self-diagnose or know how to label it. What were the warning signs to you that you knew something was happening, but you couldn't quite put your finger on what it was?
We listened to a podcast the other day in the podcast club, and it was about depression. And the guy said the opposite of the opposite of happiness, basically he said, yeah, the opposite of depression is not happiness, it's vitality. And that really struck true with me because, true? I don't know. Because I remember in that period, as I said to you, when I moved from London to the north again, my vitality was off the charts. I was exercising 6-7 days a week. I was seeing friends. I was going out. I was going to drama school 6 days a week, working 80 hours a week. And honestly, I would never slow down, and I was never tired, and I was never dissuaded. I was always enthusiastic, always up for, I set up my own production company. I took a show to the Edinburgh Fringe. I was on it, and I knew it. I was in the zone. I knew something was wrong, but I kind of just accepted it when my life had just become this drab grayness. I was just working, not really getting anywhere. And again, it was gradual. I was still trying to produce theatre and make my way as an actor, but just didn't feel exciting anymore. It felt like a grind, which is fine. It is a grind, but I'd lost that thing that it sort of was the raison d'etre in the beginning. Like, I didn't really know what I was doing or why anymore. And then really when I noticed that, that was when I wouldn't have necessarily thought I was anxious or depressed. But I can look back on it now and I can see that sort of, that grayness in my world, that lack of, there was not a real reason to get up in the morning and do something. Like, it just was all blending into one, and I could see the future was, I look back on it now, and I was engaged, right? And I could see that in the future, I did 2 months temping in a divorce solicitor's office. And my immediate thought was, I'm going to be doing this one day. And I was like, why am I in a life where I can see the end of something and a negative thing, but I'm still going forward with it? And it was stuff like that. I was like, you would never have done this. You would never have stuck at something negative before. And so, like I say, instead of being able to describe a particular sensation, really, apart from that lack of vitality, it was more just individual moments where I was like, that doesn't strike me as me. That's not how I would think, or not how I would want to behave. And again, it's no reflection on the people that I was with, or, they're amazing people. There were lots of factors involved in why that situation was the way it was, but it was the way it was, and it was incredibly damaging for all parties. So yeah, I wouldn't, like I said, it's very difficult to tell you what changed apart from that vitality, because I didn't realize it was happening until I reflected.
And then when you did realize, and it was a point of, okay, I need to move on for myself here. How did you go through that process of almost getting not the old you back, but the person, that sort of younger 20-year-old John that was sort of very easygoing and not really worried about anything that was going to happen? What was the process you went through to get to where you are now?
To sound like an evangelist, it was becoming a part of a community that enabled me to do the right thing. So doing peer support twice a week. As much as I am a facilitator for 95% of that, I'm also able to be a participant, and that massively helped me. But a big step was also taking responsibility for my own well-being and getting counselling. And so I my weeks went from being stuck in toxic patterns of thought to 3 times a week at least speaking to someone or a group of people about how I felt, and that made a massive difference. Now, it didn't make a transformational difference straight away in the same way that, have you tried yoga? Have you tried meditation? Have you tried journaling? Have you done a bit more exercise? Like, those things won't instantly help you, but retraining your patterns of thought over time, you got to fake it till you make it. It might not feel like you're doing anything. It might not feel like anything's shifting or anything's changing, but that's why you stick with it. It's a bit like, when you go to the gym and you're lifting 10 kilos and you're still lifting 10 kilos for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then you can lift 12 and a half. And, if no one put the labels on the weights, you wouldn't notice that incremental difference in weight, so you can track your progress, but you have to stick at it for a period of time, and you have to keep doing the right things, or you won't see the benefit. Short-termism in this sort of work is something that I'd been through several times. So those were the big steps: joining Talk About It Mate, becoming a big part of that, and going to see a counsellor. But equally, it was, the lockdown really helped me to stop doing a lot of negative things. Like, as much as I do love going out and being social and meeting people, and I think it was really affecting my thought processes. My hangovers were physical, yes, but mental hangovers were lasting 2-3 days. And my anxiety after I'd, been out till 6-7 a.m. was just insane. It was insane. So lockdown really sort of stopped me from doing that. Leaving my job, that helped. So I was just in this place where all the things that I was doing were positive things. And again, a bit like the gradual loss of self, the gradual gain of self, I couldn't tell you the day when I went, I am me again, or I am a better version. It was little things, and you can only measure it by how you react to certain things, how you can become more resilient. And I had a couple of moments where I just went, wow, that is different to how I would have been. That is not who I was 6 months ago. And some of those moments have been relatively recent. It's still an ongoing process. I'm not fixed. I'm not done. This process is still ongoing. And there's lots more I can still do to benefit that, and I need to take my own medicine, and I need to keep on doing the right things, even if I don't see the benefit straight away.
Was it hard for you as a man to go to counselling the first time you went, or to even just take the step of realizing that I'm going to have to go through something here to help myself?
I missed a little bit of that, but was it hard as a man to go to counselling for the first time? And then I missed. But yeah, I find that a really interesting thing, because my male identity I don't think that defines. I can't pin it down. Like, I don't ever let that define how I behave. Like, obviously I've been quite dramatic in my life, and I've always been able to make a fool of myself. And I think a lot of that sort of goes against the sort of traditional male culture of, bravado. And so I wouldn't particularly paint myself as traditionally masculine in that respect. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. But it never really factored. It never really came into my head, because the reason why I can't tell you definitively that gender and stereotypes would have made any difference or not is because the pain was so much, and I'd listened to so much, and I'd evangelized so much, and I'd seen so much about the benefit of doing these things. I believed so much in the power of talk therapy and counseling, and through other people's experiences, that it didn't matter. I didn't even think about it. So I guess the answer was no. To be honest, I even go further than that. It wasn't just that I even went. It was that I was quite, open and upfront and quick to share my own experiences, and the fact that I was seeking help in that way. I was quick to share with people when I did, for a period of time, take antidepressants. And, if I was having a bad day, I'd be quite happy to talk about that. I'm one of those annoying people that if you say, how you doing? If I know you well enough, I will tell you how I'm doing. And that will either be like, yeah, really great. I mean, this is happening, or really shit today, actually. Like I'm really in a bad place. And some people don't want to handle that, but I'm surrounded by enough people that do, which is great. That's the kind of person I am. And I don't think any of that really is to do or not to do with being a man. So
you're not really a surface person, are you? You're more of a deeper, creative type that would rather tell someone how you're actually feeling rather than just, yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I'm terrible at small talk. Like, really bad at small talk, and I am a deep thinker, for better or for worse. I'll drill down on a thought until it's absolute like core of it. And sometimes people just want to have like an on the level chat, and I used to be better at that, but I'm less good at that now. I'm good at that with people that I've talked to before, and I'm quite close to, but with new people, I feel like if there's no context to it, I do struggle with it nowadays, and I don't really know why I lost that ability. But yeah, that is, I would describe myself that way. Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad thing though. People have said that about me before. Oh, you don't really talk that much. You don't really engage in conversation, and I think people took it as I was being rude or I just didn't care. But I think on a level, for me, sometimes it's like, well, I don't want to engage in that conversation because it's either something that you're talking about another person, or it's just small talk to fill the void. And I just never really,
I think, yeah, my strategy on that is I do still talk. Like, I definitely still talk. I'm always the person to fill the void, but I won't fill the void with, I will try. My instinct, sorry, is not to fill the void with like small talk if I can. It will be to sort of be a bit more, it's not a conscious thing. I just am aware of my own patterns of behavior. I'll always try and drum up a conversation that I know will spark people's minds a bit and will make people want to engage, because I think that's, again, part of my affinity as a skill set is inspiring, coaching, engaging. You know, you've done a lot of work with young people. You work with the NCS and doing coaching with young people. I've done a lot of that same work too. I've worked with NCS as, you know, senior community facilitator and program leader and all these things where I've had to, you know, inspire people. And I think that's naturally where I go to. And I think that's one of the things that I felt like I lost a bit when I went through this 10-year period almost of downward spiral. As I went from being the person in the room that would keep everyone engaged to hiding away a little bit. Right. Some good things have come out of that though. Like you mentioned, reasons not to engage. When I was younger, I used to be very up for a debate. You might want to call it argumentative. You know, I'd have strong opinions and I'd be willing to argue those to the death. And I didn't really know why. Like, it wasn't that I needed everyone else to have my opinion. I think some level of it was probably an insecurity about my own opinion. But nowadays, I'm a lot less bothered about winning the argument or being right, or only when it comes down to matters of morality. So, you know, talking about the US election, I do care that people would prefer a president that isn't racist and a bigot and, you know, misogynist. That really matters, and I will debate that. But if you want to talk about, you know, things that are literally a plural situation, you can believe one or the other and it's not a moral imperative, then I mean, go ahead. I'll debate it for fun, but I won't get emotionally drawn into it, which is I think that is a benefit of what I've been through, because I don't know if I would have become that person so quickly or so easily if I'd not shifted my own boundaries around.
Yeah. Just wanted to track back just ever so slightly, because you mentioned antidepressants there, that you were taking those for a while. And I mean, I've had conversations with people before about taking medication for your mental well-being and stuff like that, and benefits and pros and cons, etc. Was it a benefit to you to take them, or was it just kind of, I need to take this for now just to get me to the next step?
I see the benefit of them, yeah, and I think, you know, again, this is one of those, I mean, nice link, I guess. One of those conversations that I don't think there's a right answer. You know, you can debate. I think this is difficult sometimes if we do get into a conversation about medication in the community and talk about it, right? Some people feel very strongly either way. And I try and say, well, you know, my own experience, the reasons why I started taking them were probably for the wrong reasons, in the sense that I did it to appease someone else. My depression was at a point where it was, well, my whole mental well-being was affecting the relationship, as was theirs, but they didn't want to take responsibility for that at the time. And I said, well, I'll you know, I signed up to a 6-week meditation class at the Buddhist center in town, and I started taking antidepressants. And I wouldn't say that I suffered any particularly, you know, apart from the physiological setbacks that come with particular antidepressants that are a pain. I wasn't on them long enough to really suffer the withdrawals or the come downs from tapering off. I was on them for maybe a couple of months, and they did help to level. I mean, they do help to level out your mood. You know, if your moods are spiking, I would probably recommend them, because in that same way that we say that, you know, meditation, journaling, peer support, talk therapy will help, but not necessarily immediately. Antidepressants, although they don't help immediately, will, in the period of time that they say, stop that spike if they're the right one. So I'm ambivalent about antidepressants. I don't feel particularly super strong about them, and I don't feel negative about them. I think for some people they are the answer, and for some people they're probably not. They're probably maybe part of the answer, or they're definitely just not going to help. And that I don't think they do help, from what I hear. I think nothing in isolation will fix it. So me just turning up to talk about it, mate, every Wednesday and Sunday was not going to fix my issues. Me taking antidepressants and that's it's not going to fix my issues. Me doing lots of things in combination, and also knowing that I have to do the work and take responsibility for how I feel, because at the end of the day, I'm the only one that can change how I feel, and I'm the only one that can change my actions based on how I feel. all of that has to become a part of one view on it, or else it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless. You're going to end up back in the same situation. If you get a knock or if something changes, you know, you're not going to have that resilience and you're not going to have seen that shift.
So they serve the purpose for you, and I guess they will for everybody to some degree.
Yeah, and I think they've saved some people's lives. Well, they have saved some people's lives. That's objective, I guess. That, you know, there are people that would turn around and say they saved my life, and for that reason and that reason alone, I think they need to be a part of the conversation. They might not be right for you. That's, you know, that's fair. But in the same way that I practice intermittent fasting, and I have done for over 2 years now, and it works amazingly for me. But I know a lot of people that can't do it, or it doesn't work for them, or, you know, whatever. There are certain things that objectively work for some people and objectively are the right thing for some people. And therefore we need to not speak about them as if they can't be, if we've had a different experience.
Yeah. There's no one size fits all for everybody. Is there? There's finding the best thing that works for you. And if it takes 3 or 4 times to realize what the best thing is for you, as long as you find it and you keep going once you've got it, I suppose that's the bonus, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's life, right? There isn't a one size fits all life that we all can fit into, as much as our society sort of tells us there is a particular life that we all should have. And there's a particular way of being that we all should have. And I feel like progressive politics and thought is really sort of kicking against that at the moment. And that's creating a lot of tension and anger in the world. That can be a problem for people, because as much as there is a perception of this is how you deal with having mental illness or mental health difficulties, this is a way you should live your life generally, actually creates those difficulties a lot of the time. You know, you should have this job, you should have these kids, you should live in this place, you should think like this, you should be moderate, you should be, I guess, is the sort of tagline of it. And in any way where that should compromises to go back to the notion of congruence, you know, who you really are, and you struggle against that because you feel like you're doing the wrong thing. And that can be with, you know, taking or not taking antidepressants. I know a lot of people would say, I'm not going to take antidepressants because, you know, I don't want to mess with my body. I don't want to mess with the chemicals. And I'm not besmirching that perspective. That just comes down to this idea of feeling like that's something they shouldn't do for whatever reason, where that comes from. You know, we do have this notion in society of leaving our body as it is for the main part, and I think that's kind of narrow train of thought. In that respect, I would always say that's not a great argument for working against antidepressants. And again, this podcast we listened to the other day was talking about how that's a fear of a lot of people, that actually they'll lose their selves, their sense of self. And from my experience, that wasn't the case. It's just a bit like CBT. I guess you have to get to the root of why you think the way you think, and why you hold on to these views, opinions, and patterns of thought, because sometimes they're really not helping you. Sometimes they're disabling you from doing the thing that you need to do that will help.
Yeah, people have those limiting beliefs that they carried from such a young age, and they don't actually realize that they're embedded in their thinking.
I think that's the difficult thing for me, right? When I think about my mental health journey, I remember being 25, 26 and thinking about depression, things like suicide, and my perspectives were, in my opinion, at the time, horrible. I think a lot of people's were. I think we didn't really have the articulacy around mental health and the problems that we went through. I still probably, in my mind, considered suicide as a relatively selfish act. And now I realize that for me now, that's something, again, that I would feel strongly enough about to kick out on and actually debate and actually say, you know, that is a completely individualized, narrow way of thinking that doesn't take into consideration. You've got no empathy for someone who's been in that real low ebb. And that was the point. I had no idea and sensation of what it felt like to be completely hopeless. And I was saying at the time in my, you know, unconscious, I was like, I don't understand how anyone could be depressed. I don't understand depression. Like I've been sad, but I can't imagine feeling like that all the time. And so when you're talking about limiting beliefs and from childhood and things like that, yes, there are things in my childhood that directly sort of relate to how I've felt over the last few years. But my childhood and everything before that had led me to a point at 25, 26 where I felt like that. I felt like I could never be depressed and everything's good. And, you know, I've complete confidence and boundaries and all these things. So it's weird when I speak to my counselor, I'm like, I know that for 99% of your, you know, clients, their issues will scan back to childhood. And that's really where the things that are compromising them now stem from. For me, all of the major stuff happened after 26. So I'm a bit of an unusual case in that respect. Like, it wasn't that my parents didn't love me, or, you know, that I wasn't given good examples of this, or I wasn't shown affection, or that there were negative role models in my life. I mean, there's elements of stuff in my childhood that absolutely form a part of me. Obviously, well, they form completely everything about me, but that form some of the negative things about me. But the trauma really happened after 26, and I think that's really annoying for me, because I got away with the childhood stuff. Yeah. I don't bring that stuff. It's a lot harder to unpick the childhood stuff, I think. So I'm quite lucky in that respect. But I'd made it to 26 without experiencing this mental health situation, and then everything just happened then. So anyway.
Yeah, again, no one size fits all, right? Everybody experiences it in different ways. I just wanted to ask, your support network around you when you came back up to the Northwest and you were struggling, was it important for you to have those people around, those friends, that family that you could turn to when you needed to talk or you needed some support?
So that's an interesting question, because I hadn't talked about that at all. I know I've talked a lot, but that probably was one of the biggest issues for me, not being able to deal with it as it gradually moved forward. So the irony being, I'm from around here. I was born in Salford and I was living in Bolton at the time. That's where my parents lived. And growing up, all my friends were from around here, and I had an amazing network of people and support network, and all of that strength and confidence came from being a part of a community up here. That was my life. When I came back, for better or for worse, well, for whatever reason, I should say, I didn't have friends that I saw. I didn't have a network. My family were going through their own stuff, were really busy, and they're amazing. My family are amazing support network, the best support network I could possibly ask for. But I didn't feel comfortable opening up to them. We weren't very good at that period in time of speaking about how we felt on a deep, deep level. And we are now, which is great. And I think a lot of that is because of the role modeling that I've been able to do, and that other people in my family have then followed suit and done. But at the time, really, you're asking me how important it was to have a support network. There wasn't one. Right. I had all these new friends at drama school, of whom now I really only speak to one or two. No, well, I speak to two, and maybe I would speak to a couple of others perhaps on a casual basis, but they're not close friends, bar those two that I speak about. And those two weren't close friends at the time. They've only become friends incidentally afterwards, really, to that level. So outside of the situation that I was in and the struggles that I was in, there were all these new relationships that felt strong at the time. They always do when they are born out of a real intense situation, like going to 40 hours of lessons a week and producing theatre together. Like, anyone will tell you the rehearsal room is the strongest and quickest bonding process ever, but longevity of those relationships is sometimes not necessarily a real thing. So yeah, outside of that situation, I had nothing really. And I think that contributed, because no one was hearing how I felt. Like, all my close friends, really, all the people that I felt close to over the past 5 years were 200 miles away. And I did feel isolated and lonely. And that was the first time in my life I'd felt like that. But it was masked by being busy at drama school, by seeing dozens of people every day, by doing things all the time. And I think that, yeah, like, that's a really good question, because I think if I'd been aware of that I would have, well, now in retrospective, I would say my own brother at the time, if it was my younger brother going through the same process now, I would hopefully identify that and hopefully, try and be that support network. But no one would have thought that about me. No one would have ever thought that about me. I remember posting on Facebook a couple of years ago that I was leaving Facebook, very egotistical of me, and that it was because I was going through this really difficult time, and I was very open about how I felt, very, very open. And the outpouring of messages that I got, like, of support and of love, but also of shock. Like, no one would have thought. And I still think today, if you met me, people wouldn't think that I suffer depression and anxiety on a relatively regular basis. I mean, the depression is sort of less so, but it comes in like weak phases. The anxiety is something I'll just have to live with now, because if I get triggered by something, it's very difficult to deal with. But people wouldn't necessarily think that. I've been high functioning for the last 5 or 6 years, and now I'm able to deal with it because I do have a support network. But it's taken a long time to build that.
Yeah.
One of the first things I did was join Man vs. Fat football, and immediately just having teammates and other people outside of the situation that I was in gave me a place to be myself, and that helped. So I would say, off the back of your question, getting yourself a support network can feel scary and can feel like it won't necessarily immediately help, but it is so important, so important to doing the work and getting strong again, and really dealing with those particular issues that you may have.
And talk about it, mate. It's obviously now a big part of your support network. Just how did that all come about?
Well, like I say, again, it's almost like you're reading my history. So Man vs. Fat, I joined when I was, post breakup, and well, it was just before we broke up, but then post breakup was a big part of my life, and that was a support network. And my best mate was the reason I joined that, Martin, who you've met as well, and he knew Mike, and I'd met Mike a couple of times, played football against Mike a couple of times. But then I remember Martin saying to me, "Oh, Mike's doing some sessions in just pubs and stuff. He's just meeting and having a chat." I was like, "Oh, that sounds good," but I wasn't really ready to quite take that step. And that, I know that that's a big thing for a lot of people. And if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking, it sounds good, but that first step feels scary or big, or you're not ready for it, completely understand that, completely empathize with that. I would say, taking that step will be the best thing you ever do. And it was for me. So that I knew about Mike, I knew he was doing stuff, and then he was doing facilitation for another group. And I ended up going to that group. So this wasn't Talk About It, Mate. I went to this group, went with a friend from football, and Martin was there, and a couple of other guys from football were there, actually. And it was a bit weird. It's like you walk into Alcoholics Anonymous or something, and you see people, and you're like, whoa, I didn't know you were, we're in this situation too. And it was an amazing experience. I found it really liberating, and I found that I could take to it very quickly. And I think me and Mike immediately connected unconsciously. And then we went for a meal after the group. And from that point forward, I was involved in the talk therapy aspect. And then he said, "I'm looking for volunteers for Talk About It, Mate." And I went, "You know what? This is the perfect, like I said to you, the perfect amalgamation of what I'm good at and what I need." And it was that day, I think it was January or February, and I dragged myself out of bed and I went to this training session. And like I say, I went to do some volunteering as a facilitator. And me and Mike again connected, clicked. We know we think alike with different people. We come from similar backgrounds, but we have very similar values and beliefs about what's good for, what's good practice and what's a good way to deal with these sorts of things. And I came to a few sessions as a participant and did a little bit of, I didn't really do much facilitating in the beginning because Mike was doing all the facilitation, but I was very open immediately. And because we'd moved to Zoom, we had one physical meeting and was open there, and then we had a journalist, Zaina Zanetti, come to interview us. And I remember speaking a lot about why I was at Talk About It, Mate, and it just came to me organically and naturally, and it just felt like a right fit. And then I was very open in the online peer support sessions, and eventually Mike just reached out and said, "I'd like you to take a bigger role, and I'd like you to facilitate, and I'd like you to do more." And it was just organic, because it just came from being my real self with these people, being open, demonstrating good practice. And Mike was like, "I want more of that, and I want to sort of capitalize on that." And again, if we speak to milestones and progress, I was, brought in really as the first facilitator, aside from Mike, to do the actual sessions. And now we're about to train 20 people this evening. Mm-hmm. So it is amazing to me that's where we've come from. But all the other stuff that's come out of it, because when we talk about support networks, it's not just about the peer support. The peer support is amazing, and I cannot recommend it more than I do. I can't recommend it highly enough. It is transformational. We've had people in the room say, "This has potentially saved my life." Like, that level of and some weeks it doesn't feel like that. Some weeks it feels like, "Oh, that was all right." But again, doing it over time, and sometimes you just get these incredible moments where people just really connect. So that's been massive. But also just the other stuff that I've mentioned, podcast club, book club, just the WhatsApp group, just knowing there's a group of people. When sometimes you just want to say something, you just want to talk about something, and you don't know where else to put it. This group that, the Talk About It, Mate group, is like the place. If you just see something, you just want to talk about it. "Oh, I went on this nice walk," or "Have you seen this funny joke?" or "Oh, listen to this song and it's really amazing." or I've watched this video and it's really thought provoking. Those sorts of things. Sometimes you don't want to post them in your football group or in your close friends group, because they'll be like, okay. Whereas talk about it, mate, there's always reciprocity. There's always there's always someone. And sometimes maybe there's not. That's natural in a group. Some people, you ebb and flow. But generally, there's someone who will react to it or respond to it or give you that feeling seen and heard. And that's been so important, especially when you don't actually get to see people most of the time. Having that support network and that community, that's what we call it, a community, has been, the most important thing in my life.
And in this current climate, it's huge as well, isn't it, for everybody? And I can attest to what you're saying, because I've joined the community recently and been in a couple of these support groups, and they are just fantastic. And, it's nice to see the consistent amount of messages that are coming into the WhatsApp group. And like you said, 9 times out of 10, somebody will reply.
Yeah.
It's nice to just know that there is that community there in the time that we're in, where we can't really see people as we normally would, that there are people available to chat or even just to, you kind of want to say something, and sometimes somebody might not reply, but at least somebody's heard it and somebody's read it.
Yeah, and it might be referenced later down the line. Obviously we're not going on them now, but like when we do the Walk About It Mate events, even if I've not replied to something, I'm aware of how people are doing because of their engagement. Mm-hmm. So I know how Des is doing. I know how Levi is doing. I know how Laura's doing. I know because I can sense it. I can feel it from the group. I can feel it because they are plugged in and they are reaching out. And you don't always need immediate validation, but you do benefit from knowing that you're a part of something. Mm-hmm. And I completely, I don't post in there knowing I'm going to get responded to, but I post in there knowing that my view is valid and my presence there is appreciated. And we've had some. I mean, it's got to a point now where there's just so much going on. We had a game of Among Us the other day as well, and the interesting thing was the people who played that were different people to the people that come to the groups or to the podcast club so there is such an interesting, diverse community there that we will capitalize on in terms of that they really enjoy being a part of. It's a shame that we can't meet in person yet, but when we do, the groundwork has been laid for this incredible thing that just didn't exist 9-10 months ago. Just didn't exist.
Yeah. And you've already mentioned the book club, the podcast club, the men's group. I know there's a women's group. You guys are doing walk about it, mate, when you can. When lockdown's not happening. There's so much going on. I think it's fantastic. Is there anything else that you guys are is there anything in the pipeline that we don't know about yet that might be upcoming?
Oh, there's probably a lot. So we're going to record a new season of the podcast, which will, of our own podcast, which will be recorded this time in terms of video. But what we're going to do with that podcast, which I think will be really helpful for people, especially thinking about the first step, taking that first step, is Mike and myself are going to sort of role model what peer support is. So we're going to do basically the structure of what the peer support groups is as a podcast. So we'll check in, we'll pick a topic, we'll talk about the topic, about how we feel, and then check out. So it will give people an indication of exactly what it's like to do that kind of thing. So that's on the horizon. And we've got some other media projects coming down the line that we'd like to do. We're also working with a few partners to try and do some work with the rough sleeping and homeless community, but that's probably maybe 6 to 12 months out, depending on social distancing, because it's going to involve more than just. So we'd like to offer peer support to the homeless community, really, because I feel like loneliness and not being able to, and mental health, obviously, massive issues in that community. And that's something I'm really keen to drive. So yeah, apart from those and the podcast club, the book club, the peer support, there's every Wednesday and Sunday for men, Thursday and Sunday for women. We've got a sport group that we're doing, fantasy football, and we're also doing predictions and quizzes, and we do social sometimes called Tea and Talk or the Weekend Waffle. We are looking to start a gaming community for like online gaming, but we've got cooking classes coming up. So one of our community members is a baker and a chef, and she's going to do some sort of online cooking classes. So that's coming down the line. The beautiful thing is, because it is a self-policed and self-regulated and self-driven community, if someone wants to do something, myself and Mike and Laura and all the other people will offer support,
Mm.
but it can be completely run in that sort of communal way by the person who wants to do it, and we'll facilitate that as best we can. So yeah, loads of things coming. If you're interested in anything, there's a place in Talk About It Mate for you. There's a place for everyone. We've got members who are, you know, septuagenarians who love to come along and just give their perspective and be their, you know, be them true selves. And we had an 8-year-old girl come on our last walk. So our community really ranges in age, in background, in location, in gender, in all of the things. There's no specific identity in Talk About It Mate. It is, you know, it's a for everyone situation, because everyone's situation is important, valid, and deserves to be seen and heard.
Yeah. And how can people find you guys if somebody's watching this and they want to get involved with Talk About It Mate in some way, shape, or form? Where can they go to find you?
Well, the easiest thing is just Google Talk About It Mate, but we're on all social media as @TalkAboutItMate. So that's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you want to get in touch, talkaboutitmate@gmail.com or mike@talkaboutitmate.co.uk, I think. I'll double check that one, it might be .com. But yeah, I mean, if you Google Talk About It Mate, you can't miss us. We're also on Meetup. That's how all our events are organised. So that's an app on your phone if you don't know, but you can also go to the website Meetup, and that's where we sort of calendarize. That's not a verb, is it? Schedule all our events. So if you want to know when things are, what times, and Zoom links and things like that, that's where it would be. I would say if anyone is thinking they want to join a community, it doesn't have to be Talk About It Mate, but our community, a support network, especially now. If this is the moment and the message and the sort of conversation that makes you do it, I would strongly encourage you, because it could make all the difference.
Yeah, no, I agree. So lastly then, my last question, what does John do when he needs to just completely switch off and just chill out for a little bit?
Oh, I do enjoy gaming. I like to read, and probably just sit and watch TV with my housemate at the moment. That's what I spend most time doing, nothing doing. So yeah, I'd say those 3 things.
Nice. Put you on the spot then, what you're reading at the moment?
Reading what's it called? Labyrinth of the Spirits. It's the 4th in a story cycle series by a guy called Ruiz Zafón. It's all set in Barcelona, and I started reading the first one. I was going to Barcelona, I googled best book set in Barcelona. The first one came up and I read that, and it was amazing. Yeah, so since then I've been reading all those.
Brilliant. Well, John, mate, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit and be so open and vulnerable and be honest about your journey. And I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing to Talk About It, mate, between you, Mike, and I've not had the pleasure of connecting with Laura yet, but I know my wife has been on the women's group, so she's spoke so highly of it. So thanks again. Keep doing all the amazing things you're doing and supporting everybody who's looking for a community.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Cheers, pal. Take care.
Have a good day. See you now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.